You're sitting with your friends, completely comfortable, conversation is flowing, everything is normal, and then someone new walks in, and something happens inside you that you didn't choose and can't really explain. It's like a switch somewhere just flips, and suddenly you're aware of everything. What you're doing with your hands, whether you're talking too much or too little, how your laugh sounds, whether what you just said landed right or came across weird. And 2 minutes ago, none of that was in your head at all. 2 minutes ago, you were just a person sitting with people you know, and now you're running this constant background process of monitoring yourself in real time. And it's exhausting, and it doesn't stop until that person leaves, or until you've been around them long enough that your brain finally decides they're safe. And sometimes that never happens. Sometimes you spend the entire time in that state and go home drained in a way that's hard to explain to someone who doesn't have it, because from the outside you probably seemed fine, maybe even normal. But on the inside, you spent the whole time managing something that nobody else in the room was thinking about at all. That's what social anxiety actually feels like to live in. And I've been living in it since I was around 14 years old. I was not always like this. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters to understanding how this kind of thing actually develops in a person. When I was younger, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I was genuinely comfortable around people. I wanted to be around people. I remember being the kind of kid who would drag whoever I could find into whatever I was doing, and it never felt complicated or loaded. It was just natural. And somewhere around 14, that started changing, and it didn't happen because of one thing. It happened because of a lot of things stacking up over a few years, until the way I moved through social situations was fundamentally different from how I used to. The years of being the fat kid did something to me that I don't think I fully understood while it was happening. When enough people treat you like whatever you say or do is going to be wrong, you start treating yourself that way too. You start running a check before you open your mouth. Is this going to land badly? Is this going to give someone something to work with? And at some point that check becomes automatic and you stop even noticing you're doing it. It just becomes the way you process social situations. Every rune becomes something you're reading before you participate in it. Every new person becomes someone whose reaction you're anticipating before they've even responded to anything you've said. And that's where the anxiety came from for me. It wasn't random. It wasn't just shyness I was born with. It was something that got built over years of learning that being visible came with a cost. And by the time I was 14, that lesson was pretty well established in how I operated around people. The thing that people who don't have social anxiety don't really understand about it is that it's mostly not about the big moments. It's not about public speaking or walking into a party full of strangers. Those things are hard too, but they're obvious and they're finite. The part that actually wears you down is how constant it is in the small, ordinary moments that nobody would ever think twice about. You're in a conversation and someone says something and you have a response ready, you can feel it there. And something just stops you. Not fear exactly, more like a hesitation that runs the thought through some kind of check before it's allowed out. And by the time that check finishes, the moment has passed and someone else has said something, and now your response doesn't even fit anymore. And you just quietly let it go. And this happens enough times in enough conversations that after a while you're not really participating, you're just present, which looks the same from the outside but feels completely different from the inside. And then after the conversation is over, sometimes hours later, you're thinking about it, replaying specific moments, specific things you said, and you're finding all the ways they could have landed wrong. The tone you used, the word you chose, whether you talked too much or too little, whether you came across a certain way. And the thing is, nobody else is thinking about this. The other people in that conversation moved on the second it ended, but you're still in it, still picking it apart, still finding things to cringe at that probably meant nothing to anyone who was actually there. And there's the avoidance side of it too, which is, in some ways, the part that costs the most. You talk yourself out of things before they even happen. A situation comes up, something you could go to or do or be part of, and your brain starts running through how it could go badly, and somewhere in that process, the decision quietly gets made that it's easier to just not go. And you frame it to yourself as not being in the mood, or being tired, or having other things to do. And those things might even be partially true. But the real reason underneath all of them is that showing up feels like too much to manage that day. And so you don't go. And this happens enough times that you end up missing a lot of things. And you know you're missing them. And that knowledge sits there quietly alongside everything else. There is a specific version of this that I want to talk about because I think it's one of the more confusing parts of social anxiety. At least it was confusing to me for a long time. I could be completely comfortable with my friend group, genuinely comfortable, loose, present, saying whatever came to mind without running it through anything first. And then one person who wasn't part of that group would show up, maybe a friend of a friend, maybe someone's cousin, just one person who I didn't know well, and everything would shift. Not gradually, almost immediately. And I'd spend the rest of that time in a completely different mode than I was in 5 minutes before. More careful about what I was saying, more aware of how I was coming across. Quieter in a way that probably looked strange to anyone paying attention because they just seen me being a normal person, and now I was visibly more closed off. And the frustrating thing about it was that I knew it was happening and I couldn't do anything about it. I'd be sitting there aware that I was being weird and stiff and not myself, and that awareness would make it worse. Because now I was also self-conscious about the fact that I was being self-conscious, which is its own particular kind of exhausting. And the people in my friend group would sometimes notice and try to include me more, ask me something directly to pull me into the conversation, and that would help for about 30 seconds before it settled back into the same place. What I think was actually happening, and this took me a while to piece together, was that my friend group represented a context where I had already been accepted and proven safe over a long period of time. I knew how these people saw me, I had a history with them, there was nothing to figure out. But one unfamiliar person reset all of that. Suddenly there was someone in the room whose opinion of me was unknown and unestablished, and my whole system just oriented toward that, toward managing how I was coming across to this one person, and it pulled me out of the easy comfort I'd built with everyone else. It sounds exhausting when I describe it, and honestly it was. It still is, sometimes. The place where social anxiety cost me the most, at least when I was younger, was with girls. And I want to be specific about what I mean because I think there's a difference between being shy around someone you like, which is pretty universal, and what I'm describing, which was more like a complete inability to function normally in a conversation with a girl I was interested in. With my friends, I could talk, I could be loose and present and say whatever came to mind. But the moment there was any kind of potential interest involved, any situation where something could mean something, everything I described before got amplified to a point where I was basically just trying to get through the interaction without embarrassing myself, which is a terrible way to connect with anyone. You can't be interesting or genuine or funny when your main goal is just to not mess up. And flirting specifically felt completely out of reach for a long time. Not because I didn't understand it conceptually, but because flirting requires a certain willingness to be seen, to put something out there that could be rejected. And that was exactly the thing social anxiety makes hardest. You're already so aware of how you're coming across that adding any kind of vulnerability on top of that feels impossible. So I just didn't. I'd have conversations that stayed completely surface level, safe, going nowhere, and I'd walk away knowing that nothing happened and that I was the reason nothing happened. And looking back, I can see pretty clearly how many potential connections just quietly died because of that. People I could have gotten to know better, situations that could have gone somewhere, that just didn't because I couldn't get out of my own way long enough to let them. That's the part that stings a little when I think about it honestly. But it also got better over time, not because the anxiety disappeared, but because I got more comfortable operating through it, which I'll get to. I want to be honest about how this actually changed, because I think the way people usually describe overcoming something like this is a little misleading. There wasn't a moment where I figured it out. There wasn't a conversation or a book or a decision that made it click. It was just a slow accumulation of situations where I felt the anxiety and engaged anyway. And over time, that built into something that functions differently than it used to, even if the underlying feeling never fully went away. The way it usually went was this. I'd be in a situation that made me uncomfortable, a conversation with someone new, a group where I didn't know everyone, a moment where I wanted to say something and felt that familiar hesitation. And instead of letting the hesitation win, I'd just say the thing anyway. And sometimes it was awkward, and sometimes it wasn't. And gradually the ratio started shifting. And what that repetition did over time was not eliminate the anxiety, but sort of shrink the authority it had over my behavior. It was still there. I could still feel it, but it stopped being the thing that made the final call on whether I participated or stayed quiet. I think what actually changed was my relationship to the feeling itself. Early on, feeling that anxiety in a social situation meant something to me. It felt like a signal that I was about to do something wrong, that I should pull back and protect myself. And after enough experiences of feeling it and engaging anyway and having it be fine, it stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling more like just background noise. Something that was present but didn't necessarily mean anything. And once that shift happened, even partially, things started to open up in a way they hadn't before. I'm still shy. I want to say that clearly because I don't want to make this sound like some complete transformation where I became a different person. I'm still the quieter one in most rooms. I still feel that shift when someone unfamiliar enters a group. But I'm present in conversations now in a way I genuinely wasn't before. I can hold a conversation with someone I don't know without spending the whole time managing how I'm coming across. And that's a meaningful difference, even if it's not the dramatic before and after that makes for a cleaner story. So where does that leave me now? I'm still shy. I want to be upfront about that because I think it would be dishonest to end this by suggesting I worked through everything and came out the other side as some fully comfortable, socially confident person. That's not what happened. I still feel that shift when someone unfamiliar enters a room. I still sometimes sit on thoughts too long and let the moment pass. I still replay certain conversations afterward and find things to pick apart that probably nobody else remembers or cared about. But there's a meaningful difference between where I was and where I am now, and it's worth being specific about what that difference actually is. I'm present in conversations in a way I wasn't before. When I'm talking to someone, I'm actually there, engaged, responding to what they're saying, rather than managing how I'm coming across. And that sounds like a small thing, but it changes the whole quality of an interaction for me and probably for the person I'm talking to. People can tell when you're actually present and when you're somewhere else, behind your own eyes. And for a long time, I was somewhere else. And if you're someone who recognizes yourself and what I've been talking about across this whole video, I just want to say something that I genuinely wish someone had said to me earlier. The anxiety is probably not going to disappear. I know that's not what people want to hear, but I think it's more useful than promising something that in my experience doesn't actually happen. What changes is how much room it takes up and how much authority it has over what you actually do. And the only way I found to shift that was to keep engaging anyway, to keep showing up to the uncomfortable situations and letting them happen, and to accumulate enough evidence over time that the thing I was afraid of was almost never as bad as the version my brain constructed in advance. That evidence builds slowly, but it does build.